we had had to laugh at ourselves a little bit when this pandemic first started, because we had been on a path that was a little bit different than the traditional, and trying to make change and trying to update our system. We had a portrait of a graduate developed that had 21st century skills, and we're trying to do some things differently within our district. And part of the rationale and the justification to aim at different targets and to instruct differently and to give more ownership to kids was because it's a rapidly changing world. And we were saying this for the last 3 years before March 13th hit. So once that hit, we were no longer struggling for evidence of a rapidly changing world. It was changing faster than every 2 weeks, we literally would get a different set of guidelines and objectives from our state of how we can teach, who we can teach, what modes are appropriate, what are inappropriate, what counts towards our required number of days. So we were putting the puzzle together and then taking it apart, and then putting it together and taking it apart differently throughout. So our teachers have done an amazing job of keeping up with the rapidly changing world that we thought was rapid before, and now it's on like hyperspeed. I think the unlearning that really has happened, though, since we've been in this pandemic is how, I think, two areas come to mind: the relationships that they have with students and that they foster among students, and then our assessments. Both of those areas we've had to kind of reinvent completely, because we no longer benefit from the face-to-face time and overhearing the interaction between two students, or seeing the body language of a student as they walk into class and be able to check into them. So the relationships, we didn't know how much we relied on the physical sharing of space, and that hurt us in our ability to support kids and continue those relationships. And then we had some great insights by teachers saying on the assessment side of some of their assessments they realized had Googleable answers on them. And they were going to give them while kids were at home alone on a computer with a smartphone and no one there monitoring them. They realized some of my assessments don't really, and we ended up with the conversation, well, if you can find it on the internet, how important is it that they can answer that? Maybe we need to go a little deeper and have some performance things and do something. So I think our assessments overall improved because we realized that some of the lower level questions didn't fly in our new reality.
Oh, that's so powerful, Brian. You know, Mike and I always say we can change grading and assessments as much as we want, as long as we still give extra credit for kids that bring in a box of Kleenex. We never get rid of that, right?
Yeah, right.
Thank you, Brian. Faith, do you want to chime in on that one?
No, absolutely. And just kind of thinking about Brian's point too, please don't tell my son's science teacher about that Googling, because I feel like that's what got us through the first trimester. But there's a lot of things that you mentioned, which I think ring very true to our district as well. I think the biggest thing that I noticed was in March, as everybody scrambled like across the nation to really start preparing for this remote environment, what we try to do in our school district was just replace what we were doing in the classroom and put it on Zoom. And I think the issue we had there was that we believed all the things we've been doing in the space would carry over exactly into the Zoom world. And to be honest with you, probably back in March, I maybe knew how to say Zoom or spell Zoom, but it was such a different out of the box thinking for a lot of us that we hope that if we do the same things we've always done, we're gonna still get that response. We learned very quickly that lack of student engagement, things that we had taken, I don't want to say for granted, but just assumed to be practice, weren't working for us in the springtime. So we really had to revamp that. What I think we've also learned is that students just being in our space was enough. And we thought, wow, they can just absorb all the information that's coming to them. But now when there's more conflicting, there's things that are happening at home, they're not this captive audience like we've always had. It really has forced us to look at students in a different way, their level of engagement, how we really are making sure that they're understanding the material. And so what we kind of did in March, like I said, kind of getting through the school year, spent a lot of time kind of reevaluating, getting feedback from staff members. Our administrative staff was instrumental in this process, but also from our students and our families. How are you experiencing this remote learning environment? And then we spent throughout the summer really kind of adjusting our programming so that in the fall, we'd be able to offer something that really would be meeting the needs of more of our students. And we do know that some of our students will continue to struggle, but we put a lot of things in place. And my superintendent always says, it's time to stitch a new garment. And I think that's what we've done. I think there's a lot of things that we have changed that even when we go back in person, those things are going to be maintained now in our district, which is exciting, but it was a rough road getting there.
Yeah, Joe, go ahead and follow that impressive answer.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm just gonna go Crickets. So here's the thing that I think that came up apparently for me the most time is the thing that when we started in the pandemic. I think one thing that really came to the forefront that we talked about two things are going to get answered unequivocally in the first month of this pandemic. The first is how well do we know our kids, and the second is what are we willing to do for them when they're not here. And I think one of the things that was really important to us as we moved into that area was if we didn't know what kids needed in terms of their basic needs, if it came to food, electricity, Wi-Fi, whatever the case may be, if we didn't know that about kids, then we had failed up to that point, making sure that we had great relationships with our kids. And even if we didn't know exactly what they needed, if we weren't connected to the people who did, then I think we failed at that piece of it. And we just had to make sure that we could be connected to people who they were connected to. So that was the first part, is making sure that we, how well do we know our kids. The second piece was, what are we willing to do for them when they're not here? And really that means, how are we going to take a step back from what we've always known and move to a place that nobody knows what to do, right? And so it was really interesting for me is we were able to turn the system around in about a week, right? Which in and of itself is crazy. And it wasn't great, but it got us through. And our people were working so hard in the spring, and you could hear the national narrative of teachers in the spring of last year was like, look at these people. Look what they're doing. They are creating a new environment for kids. They're amazing, right? And then when we got to the fall and we'd done all the work in the summer and we created a better system, a system that was really more responsive and proactive at the same time, and all of a sudden it turned into, can't they do just a little bit more? And I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Like, our people are crushing it. They are doing incredible things for kids. They're changing the way that they instruct. They're changing the way that they build relationships, because now it's on a screen, right? And they're giving kids opportunities to connect in ways that they never have. Now, I think the idea that we have to keep in mind is we had to unlearn a lot of those practices to get here. But if we always kept the kid at the heart, at the core of what we're doing, we were always going to be able to move forward with whatever that core was.